So I think that the Canadian market, while smaller, still proportionally has amazing innovation happening in the fintech space for the different products. There's so many different products.
In terms of what you've encountered, I know in Canada we love to do comparison narratives, especially with our neighbors down south. I mean, you can talk about clients, but also the larger landscape itself. So the alternative funding scene here versus the US. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about tech as well and how FinTech fits into that. But where are we in Canada in relation to what is a very heated alternative lending scene in the US?
There's less lenders in the Canadian market, and there's way more lenders and funders in the US market. How does that change things? I don't know if that changes things too much. I really do think that the behavior lies, like what the stacking, all that stuff ultimately lies with the behavior of the customer or whether the broker can convince them. There's some brokers that will convince them to take more money, which is absolutely evil because that's not necessarily good for the business. It increases defaults. But then there's some merchants who will be reckless, right? And in the United States, and you don't see that as much. That is a big, big difference. And I talked about it earlier. And in terms of, you talk about the difference of the markets, brokers in the United States demand these very large commissions, and it just wasn't developed and doesn't exist that way in the Canadian market. We do offer larger commissions, but there's other companies in the Canadian market that do direct. They do direct as a big part of their business. They do brokers as well. They don't pay large commissions. They pay much smaller commissions. And I think that this is a very touchy subject because brokers obviously want the largest commissions, but there's a certain point we have to cut that off, and it's not good for anybody. It's just too much. The economics of the deal becomes too negative for the business, and it ends up hurting everyone. Why does it hurt everyone? Well, yeah, sure, the broker makes a big commission to start, but the lifetime value of that customer is now shorter because if their propensity default is higher, then the possibility of renewing that customer and a portfolio of customers goes down. So I do think that the Canadian market is better well built in terms of how it's structured with respect to commissions to brokers. And I think that's a nice advantage the Canadian market has. And I hope that never changes because it's good for everyone. It's good for the business. It's good for the broker, whether they believe it or not. And it's definitely good for the funder. The funder always wants what's in the best interest of the business. You always want your businesses to survive and do well. If they're doing well, you're doing well. We're not taking an equity stake in the company, but it's pretty darn close. You know what I mean? Making a debt position in these size companies is very darn close to making an equity position and really betting on the company to do well. So that is on the broker side. And then let's talk a little bit about FinTech side. It's a much smaller country compared to the US, of course, right? But I'm so surprised by the different innovation and technology that does exist. The startup that I have is a software product that is going to help the lending industry, right? It's going to help facilitate the funding process and take away a lot of inefficiencies, bring a lot of clarity, reduce operating expenses of lenders, increase efficiency of what the brokers have to deal with when dealing with customers. And the borrower or the merchant is going to have a more seamless experience, not have to fill out all of these forms and get all these bank statements. It's a product that's going to bring efficiency, transparency to the industry. And I'll tell you, the companies that I've seen that are also involved in the FinTech space up there have been super, super impressive. Super impressive. So I think that the Canadian market, while smaller, still proportionally has amazing innovation happening in the FinTech space for the different products. There's so many different products that are up there. I mean, there's risk management tools that are up there in the Canadian space that we've looked at. There's data aggregation tools that we've looked at in the FinTech space. And there's much more. I mean, there's so much more. You know what I mean? I think that the Canadian market is right there. They're also developing their APIs the banks are developing their APIs. And I will say this, here's one last thing on this. I actually believe the advantage in the Canadian market compared to the US is with the banks. In the US, there's 21,000 banks, and the top 10 banks control 68% of the market. The top 4 or 5 banks, I forgot what the stat is, controls like 95% of the market. So their ability to increase their technology to be able to better serve business in Canada, consumer and business, through technology is going to be a lot easier because adaptation with banks and different players like that, because they hold the data of what the fintechs and the funding companies need, and they're building out those APIs. So I think that in a few years, 3, 4, 5 years, you're going to see that the Canadian market is going to be able to run more efficiently, accurately, transparent compared to the US because of the adoption of the new technology that's coming online with respect to getting access to customer information to make credit decisions.